Okay, so welcome everybody who's decided to join us via video tonight. I want to thank everybody for giving up their time and just make everyone aware that we're creating this resource and recording it with the permission of the people that are attending so that we can share it with those who couldn't make it at the times we've allotted. So this is the first in our Stay Afloat Quick Bite series. We're hoping to create 6 of these training modules to help people understand some of the key elements of how we can support our industry in wellness. We're going to get back to basics today and introduce some of the terms and phrases and unbuzz some of the buzzwords that can be quite common in this area so that people have got a good basic foundation upon which to start talking about mental health, mental illness, psychological safety, and how we can care for each other. So before I get into the slides, I just want to firstly acknowledge that the land that I'm meeting you all on is the land of the Kaurna people here in South Australia, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging on any of the lands of First Nations people upon which you are when you meet me today. I also want to acknowledge the lived experience of people in our industry and certainly people watching this video in terms of mental health and mental illness. So many of us are touched by mental illness in our families and in our local communities. And as you watch this video, some of the conversations may be a little bit triggering, and we've had that conversation for the people in the room as well. So if you feel triggered, if you feel frustrated, we've given instructions to those that are joining us live to let us know via the chat room. For others, press pause, take a step away. If there's someone you can connect with to get support, please do so. And if you have any feedback about any of the contents of this recording, please don't hesitate to let us know. So I'm going to jump into our first quick bite session now. Mental illness, mental health, mental wellbeing, and the seafood industry. What are we going to touch on in the next half hour or so? As I said, we're going to unbuzz some of the buzzwords. I'm going to talk to you about mental health and mental illness and the state of play in Australia. I'm going to take some of the stats that many of you hear regularly through the press and explain to you what they actually mean. Then I'm going to share some of the insights from within our own seafood industry. And at the end, I want to make sure you've got something practical that you can take away with you. So I'm going to share a handy tool with you that you can print from our website, from this presentation, or ask me to send some hard copies to you to use in your local communities. So let's get started. Mental health, what does it mean? It's also referred to as psychological health. And you can see the World Health Organization definition here, which explicitly defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So it's really important that we understand that this definition goes beyond just feeling happy most of the time and things like that. It actually talks to how we function as individuals and how we contribute to our own lives and the lives of others. This definition becomes particularly important for people who have experienced illness, in this case, mental illness. As we know with physical illnesses, sometimes when people have recovered from an illness, it doesn't necessarily mean they can get back to the full functioning that they enjoyed previously. But recovery can mean getting back to a level of functioning that is meaningful and rewarding in my life, even if it means that it looks a little bit different than it did before. So that's why it's important that we understand that there's a range of aspects to this notion of mental health or psychological health. There's another word that people are starting to hear a lot around the traps, and that's this phrase called psychological safety. Most of us in industry are aware of the need to keep ourselves and those around us safe at work. Increasingly, though, employers and workplaces are realising the need, both legally and ethically, to provide psychological safety at work. So what does that mean? What it means is the same as it means for physical safety. Employers have a responsibility to ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, that workers and other people are not exposed to psychological health and safety risks. Now, a lot of employers that I've spoken to over a number of years really only see risk in the workplace as the risk of physical harm. There's kind of this presumption that if my people are coming to work and there's mental illness or mental health problems involved, they're quite possibly happening somewhere else other than work. And we work to, in different ways, accommodate that or manage that through the workplace. But the reality is that the workplace can absolutely contribute to somebody's mental health problems or towards mental illness. It can make a difference to how they're coping with mental health problems or mental illness that may have occurred previous to that workplace or outside. But it can also be a causal factor in mental health problems and mental illness, and that can lead to significant costs for the employer, for the economy, and of course all the ethical issues that go with it. Many employers also believe that psychological safety in the workplace, or that they're providing a safe workplace, provided that there's an absence of bullying, harassment, and discrimination in the workplace. In fact, the definition of psychological safety in the workplace is much broader than that. Just like in physical safety, we need to identify the risks to people's psychological safety, and we need to show that we're working hard to minimise those risks. So in future Quick Bite series, if there's interest, we're going to talk more about this workplace concept around physical, psychosocial, psychological safety and how it impacts on mental illness. But for today, I just wanted people to start getting used to the fact that there is this thing called psychological safety, and employers, people in the workplace need to be aware of it. So Safe Work Australia tell us that our role as employers is firstly to try and prevent harm, just like we do physically, by identifying risks and putting things into place to avoid hazard and avoid injury. Then where there is potential for injury, or there is mental illness or stressors in the workplace, to intervene early and then to support recovery. So the same concepts as we use in the world of physical safety. Really important to note too that poor psychological work health and safety can not just lead to mental illness, but it can lead to an increased risk of physical injury as well. So if people are experiencing mental health problems or mental illness and their mind isn't sufficiently on the job, their focus is distracted and things like that, then they are also going to risk injury in physical terms as well. So it gets a little trickier than that, and we'll just touch on this notion around, we've talked about psychological health. Psychosocial health is a term that's often used as well in terms of how we manage to stay well and healthy from that non-physical side. So psychosocial health can be divided up into 4 areas, where we have our mental state, which is our thinking. So many of us think about our mental health in terms of feeling happy, feeling sad, and those types of things. And that can be tied into mental health and referenced as emotional health. So emotional health is my feelings. Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I angry? Mental health is my thinking, my thought patterns. What am I listening to? What messages am I telling myself in my head? Am I telling myself that I'm positive and that I'm doing well, or am I giving myself messages that are self-critical about how I'm going in certain areas of my life? My social health relates to how I relate to other people, so really important in the workplace. And then my spiritual health talks to my being and my very deep values set. So psychosocial health is a result of a very complex interaction between our history, our thoughts, our interpretations of the past, our interpretations of what's going on around us, and what all of that means to us today. So this notion of keeping ourselves healthy from a psychosocial perspective is really quite complex. So we've talked psychological safety, we've talked about what psychological or mental health in the positive stands for. Let's get into the last of our buzzwords, and that is exactly what is mental illness. So a mental illness is a condition that causes major changes to our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. So there's kind of 3 out of 4 of those psychosocial elements in there. It also impairs our functioning, and it's persistent over time. So there's 3 elements there that need to be met for mental health problems to be considered a mental illness. Mental illness is also referred to as a mental disorder. So those words are interchangeable. They are signifying that the problems that that person's experiencing are diagnosable as an illness, as a disorder. Those words interchange. People experiencing mental health problems may be experiencing temporary problems that are not diagnosable, or they may be experiencing mental illness. So we know when we're struggling and we're experiencing a lot of stressors, it may change the way that we're thinking and the way we're feeling and the way we're behaving. If we're still able to function regularly, normally over the long term, then that is what we refer to as mental health problems or situational distresses. If it impairs our functioning, for example, if we're losing a lot of sleep, if we're having trouble focusing on work, if we're no longer interacting in social environments, or in fact having time off work and things like that, if it's stopping us from living our normal life, then that's another ingredient that points to a potential mental illness. And the third one is that it must be persistent over time. So there's a couple of international guidelines that dictate how doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists can identify a mental illness and which mental illness it is. And it's very, very specific in terms of what are the changes to thoughts, feelings, and behaviours that a person with a particular illness might experience, how might it impair their functioning, and it gives very clear guidelines about how long must those symptoms have been experienced for that situation to be diagnosed as a mental illness. There's a great group of people over in WA called Regional Men's Health that I have to credit with the picture that you're looking at on your screen here, and they call it our mental health and wellbeing gauge. Rural Men's Health in WA work really hard in the agricultural sector right across Western Australia and have some fantastic tools that they've shared with us for this. And I like how they've demonstrated this gauge, somewhat like the gauge in a vehicle or a tractor or a piece of equipment. And we refer to being well as the green zone. When we're being well, things happen, stressors happen, but we can deal with them and we can get on with our everyday life. Every now and then, situations can creep up on us. It might be a single situation, or it might be a run of situations that start to build up. And we start to feel significant changes to our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours, and maybe have some short-term impacts on how we're functioning. Once that becomes chronic, once those things are persistent over time, is when we get to a point where potentially we could be diagnosed with a mental illness. Mental Health First Aid Australia are one of the leading providers of training, and through the Stay Afloat program, we invite as many people as we can to join us to undertake Mental Health First Aid accreditation. The mental health continuum takes us in a similar way from the green end, which is positive, healthy and functioning, to the red end, where we're having a severe impact on everyday functioning. What might that look like in terms of what's going on around us? Let's have a look at this chart, and we've got the green this time up the right-hand end and the red down the left-hand end. When we're in that chronic stage of potentially experiencing mental illness, the things that might be happening with our thinking is we're very reactive. Reactive is where we just respond without thinking to things that are happening around us, and quite often we'll respond from a very emotional place, from a very immediate place, and certainly the way that we have responded in the past when we're thrown into difficult situations. When we're in a healthier place, our response to things that happen becomes what we call more responsive. And responsive is around when an adversity or a problem crops up, that we are in a place where we can stop and think about what the best responses and what the best solutions might be. Likewise, when we're in the red zone, our coping mechanisms can often be unhealthy coping. It can be that we are responding poorly to others. It can be that we're replacing our afternoon exercise with a glass of wine or beer instead. It can be fast food. It can be not eating too much, staying up late rather than getting our rest. There's a lot of different ways that we can cope unhealthily. And healthy coping at the other end is doing things that we know will help us to cope. So things like exercising to manage stress, ensuring that we get enough rest and those types of things. Again, because we're reactive in that red zone, we can often find ourselves automatically going to unhealthy coping mechanisms, which actually make the situation worse, not better. The next two I really like to talk about. So thinking traps is a really interesting one. Thinking traps, I mentioned earlier, the stories that we tell ourselves. We can get into these traps where something bad happens, and we start to not just think about what's happened, but what could happen next, and after that, and after that, and after that. And so we can get to a place where a small thing that's happened can blow up to being something really quite significant. So for example, I might hand a report in late to my manager, and my manager's a little bit short with me on the phone because I've let my manager down. And the next day, the manager doesn't return my call quickly, and I get thinking that my manager might be really upset with me. And then I remember another email I didn't answer the other week. And what if she gets more and more upset? And what if I make another mistake? Maybe she just wants to get rid of me. Maybe I'm going to lose my job. These are the thoughts we call thinking traps. Some people call it catastrophizing. What if this problem I've got doesn't go away? What if this problem I've got gets worse and worse and worse over time, and we get trapped in that thought in a negative spiral, which only adds more to our stress and more to the emotion that's leading us towards further mental health problems. Reflexive thinking, on the other hand, when we're feeling healthy, is where we're able to be objective about what's going on, maybe go and seek a second opinion from somebody else because we know that we can be a bit prone to going to the negative, or reminding ourselves that this is not necessarily the way that it's going to go and we can respond accordingly. Boundaries are an interesting thing. At the red end, we talk about this thing called porous boundaries. So if you imagine a sponge takes on water and gets heavier and heavier. Quite often when we're unclear in our decision making, when we're experiencing too much stress, our boundaries can become quite porous. So whether that's boundaries at work, where we start to just take on everybody's work and do it myself because I'm the only one that can do it right and other people won't meet my deadlines, or where it's porous boundaries around how much time I spend resting versus not resting because I've got a lot of work to do, so I'm going to prioritize that and stay up late and work and add to my stress, or whatever it might be. We can tend to take on too much that's not healthy. Whereas when we're in the green zone, we're much more likely to have strong boundaries. We're much more likely to know what do we need to do to get through our lives in a meaningful and structured way to ensure that we have balance. So in simple terms, those two arrows below talk about when we're at the red zone, we feel stuck, we're distressed, we're feeling burnt out, as opposed to at the other end, we feel able to choose our responses, we're able to choose actions that we will lead to the outcomes we want, and we can be having that feeling of thriving. So I'd love you all to reflect on that for a moment in terms of the things that we see and hear around us in our industry. And I'll give you some tools shortly in terms of how you can have conversations about that. One thing I do say to people everywhere is, you know, you can do a lot worse than just putting this slide on the lunch table or the kitchen table for people to have a talk about and share stories. Curiosity of what's that can lead to some really interesting conversations. So let's talk about some of these facts. We've sort of covered the buzzwords, and I think we've hopefully got a better understanding of what they are, and in particular, what is and isn't mental illness now. We hear the statistics all the time on TV and in the media that 1 in 5 Australians have a mental illness at any given time. Now, I want to share with you that that information comes from a big research piece that's done by the National Health and Medical Research Institute every 2 or so years. And they study thousands and thousands of Australians, and they come back with a whole lot of findings and statistics around the health of the Australian population. Mental health is just one of those pieces. So for some time now, the results have been quite consistent that 1 in 5 Australians in any given 12-month period will experience a mental illness. Now, the most common, and when they're talking about that, they're talking about 1 in 5 experiencing one of the 3 most common mental illnesses, which you can see on this slide here, are anxiety disorders, depressive and bipolar disorders, and substance use disorders. So the bottom column, the bottom row, sorry, where it talks about any common mental illness, is the sum of those other 3 mental illnesses. So take a moment and have a look at this table, and I'll invite you to put in chat, for those of you that are live, and for others that are not, what do you notice about the numbers? So that's a really common one. Someone said here that the numbers don't add up. Really good point. If you look down the right-hand column, 14.4 plus 6.2 plus 5.1 adds up to over 25, not to the number 20.0 in the bottom right-hand column there. That's because some people in this table are experiencing more than 1 mental illness at any given time. There's a term called comorbidity that you may have heard, and what that effectively means is that a person has 2 illnesses that impact their life at once, 2 or more illnesses, I should say. So in this table, one would expect that there are some people with anxiety disorder or depressive or bipolar disorder that are also experiencing a substance use disorder. And important to reiterate that substance use disorders go across the realms of tobacco through to alcohol, to prescription drugs, illicit drugs, and so on. Substance use disorder is deemed officially, internationally, a mental illness. And as you can see here, the 3rd most prevalent one. Over our whole lifetime, chances are that almost 1 in 2 Australians will experience a mental illness. Other interesting pieces around these statistics are that clearly you can see females experience much higher rates of anxiety disorders than males. One of the reasons, or one of the prevalent reasons for this, is the high rate of domestic violence in Australia. You can see that, on the other hand, men experience higher rates of substance use disorders than women. And so there's also some social norms in there that are perhaps driving some of those behaviours outside of purely what people are experiencing or what their makeup is. So let's talk now about some key stats in our industry. We know, and we can assume, that at least 1 in 5 people in our industry are experiencing a mental illness at any given time. We also know from the research, in fact, that in the seafood industry, our levels of distress on average are higher than the rest of the population. So the significance of the experience is more severe in our industry. We call it twice the double base rate of psychological distress than the typical population. So let me have a talk now about what are the things that really stress our fishers to a point where they may become chronic and may become mental illness. There was a big piece of research carried out and published back in 2017 by Dr. Tanya King, supported by the FRDC, and a range of other amazing researchers contributed to it. It was a research piece on the health and well-being of fishing families across Australia, and it definitely honed in on mental health as one of those aspects. So the chart that you're looking at on the screen now, I'm happy to provide anyone with a full copy of. I've just taken the top 4 stressors to demonstrate a point in this slide. This question was, how much do the following factors contribute to stress among those in your fisheries? No surprises for anybody that the #1 stressor for commercial fishermen at that point was deemed to be government red tape. And the next 2, in fact, stressors also relate to government. The first of those is uncertainty about future changes to government access regulations. And the third is changes to government access regulations. And what's interesting to note there, beyond the fact that, yes, we understand that the regulatory environment and the administrative environment is one of the biggest stressors, but the perspective also that the uncertainty about future changes is actually as much and a little bit higher in terms of the amount of stress it's causing for people in our fisheries. Uncertainty, lack of control, not knowing what's coming and not knowing what I can do about it is an enormous stressor for people across the board. So in an industry where we know that change has been consistent and ongoing and there's still more change coming, we can imagine that that uncertainty, and I don't think there's any surprise, is what leads us to higher levels of stress than we would ordinarily like to endure. So what can we do about it in the absence of being able to put a stop to the changes, put a stop to what might happen in the future? I often ask people the question, what if we could reduce the impact of that uncertainty? And some simple tools that we use is to try and break the thinking traps, for example. The thinking trap of the regulations might go a certain way for me, which may lead me to lose my business, my livelihood, and then everything is impacted. One of the things we encourage people to do is to, yes, acknowledge that there's a worst case scenario that this could lead to, but also to think about, well, what's the best case scenario? What if we got a surprise? What might the least impactful thing to be? And what might be the middle or the probable impact? So a great example of this was around COVID times, when I had people that I was working with saying, this could change everything. We could all lose our jobs. We could lose our health. We could lose everything. And I would encourage them to think about different levels of what might happen. So that's the worst case. What if COVID actually doesn't find its way to your area of living? What impacts will that have? What if the vaccine's found? Or what if it actually doesn't turn out to spread as quickly as people think? Now, notwithstanding that we know we're in different places to that today, but the key here is that when you hear people talking about how much the uncertainty of the future is causing them issues, if we can get people to try and think about the now and try to think about other options other than just the worst case scenario, then we can perhaps start to reduce by small percentages the stress that people are feeling. So let's talk now about some of the realities of support that people receive in Australia. Of those 1 in 2 Australians that are experiencing a mental illness at any given time, only 35% of them are receiving professional help. Now, people ask me, well, then how do they know that they're experiencing it? The 1 in 20 figure, I mentioned the study that comes from early, the National Health and Medical Research study. The questions that are asked in that survey are the questions that a clinician would ask if they were trying to figure out whether or not a person has a mental illness. So those 1 in 2 Australians have answered the questions that show that they have all of the signs and symptoms of a diagnosable mental illness, but only 35% of them then answer yes to the question of whether or not they've sought help for any mental illness. So of the people with depressive disorders, 59% received help. Anxiety disorders, 38% received help. And substance use disorders, 24% received help. Now, in future sessions, we're going to talk about what some of the barriers to getting help and some of the reasons that people don't get help, because there's quite a big range and people are often surprised at how many barriers there are and what reasons exist. But if we know and understand them, and then we seek further support and training through things like mental health first aid, then we can really guide people towards help. A key part of the Stay Afloat program through our trusted advocates in community is having trained people who are connected to industry in local seafood communities that can provide a listening ear, and where they sense a person may benefit from getting some extra connection to a network or to professional help, they are trained in how to have that conversation. Now, for those of you that enjoyed hearing about the Rural Men's Health Initiative in WA, I strongly encourage all of you to get onto YouTube and look up the link. I can send a copy of this link to anybody, and those who have registered will get a copy of this presentation. And that's an initiative called Are You Bogged, Mate? Wonderful lady up in Queensland who's an agronomist, travels around to all the Queensland farming regions, and in trying to work out how she could help drown the stigma of mental illness and help contribute to preventing suicides in the agricultural industry, she came up with this analogy about getting bogged. And she says that simply mental health is like getting your machinery bogged. If you get your machinery a little bit bogged, then you can probably go and grab a tractor and pull yourself out. If you get yourself quite a bit bogged, then you probably need to go and grab a mate, get him to come over with his big truck and give you a hand. But if you're really, really badly bogged, then you need to call in the experts. So we use language like that to have a think about. Mental health problems are no different to physical health problems. Are you a bit unwell? Are you stuck? Stuck's a really good word to use. Are you feeling a bit stuck? Can you get yourself out? If you're really stuck or you've been stuck for a long time, maybe you need to firstly connect with a mate and maybe even connect with some professional help. As I said, that link is there. It's a fantastic resource and a fantastic way, again, of playing it to a few people and getting some conversations started. So finally, I said that I would leave you with a handy tool, and this tool is available on the Stay Afloat website. I have A5 postcard-sized cards that you can put up onto pinboards or leave in lunchrooms or in the galley of the boat or whatever you like. And this is a tool for starting conversations about stress. We talk about stress as being like an old mate. It can come and visit. When your old friend is coming to visit, you're probably feeling pretty good. You're probably looking forward to it. You're looking forward to a catch up, and you're thinking about positive things. You've got energy. You're thinking about, you know, going to buy a cake or something to eat. You know you've got to be ready at a certain time, and so you're preparing yourself. In a similar way, when stress is just visiting, it's a good thing. We need stress in our lives. We need good stress, and we need a little bit of the bad stress, because the negative stress, the fear-based stress, is what the cavemen had back in the day when there was the early days of fight and flight. You know, the tiger turns up at the doorway of the cave, and I need that immediate stress reaction to either fight the tiger or get away from there. The challenge we have is that too many of us spend too much time fighting off little tigers in our lives, and it becomes chronic. So anyway, my old friend comes to visit. I'm looking forward to seeing her. As you can see here on the slide, I've got loads of energy. I'm on top of things. I'm challenged. I'm feeling sharp. And likewise, in a work sense, we can be feeling those things. But my friend doesn't leave. I thought she'd be here for an hour or so. I thought we'd have a chat, a couple of refreshments, and that she'd go, but she doesn't. In that world, when somebody's overstaying, I'm starting to get a bit distracted and I'm wondering when she's going to go. I'm thinking I had other things to do today, starting to feel a bit rushed and busy because I don't know how I'm going to get everything done because my friend has overstayed her welcome. In a similar sense, when stress is overstaying its welcome, we can be showing symptoms like that. So if I sense that I'm feeling distracted, frustrated, I feel like I'm always rushing or busy, I'm putting things off that I know need to be done, or I'm feeling like I'm in the last minute mindset all the time, it actually could be that stress is overstaying its welcome. My friend finally admits that she's having a few problems and she needs a bed for a couple of nights to get away from it all. So I go, all right, no worries. I'll skip my afternoon walk and shopping trip. We'll get takeaway. We'll open a bottle of wine, whatever it is, and I'll just get on with it. And that continues for a few days to a point where I'm starting to feel like I'm running late all the time. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, very happy to help my friend, but I might be a bit snappy with the rest of the family because there's just a bit too much going on for me at the moment. So like that, stress can settle in. So when I see myself skipping exercise or skipping some of the other good habits that I've got, when I feel like I'm running late a lot or feeling overwhelmed, or I catch myself snapping at my partner, then I ask myself the question, could it be that stress is settling in a bit for me? My friend doesn't end up leaving. She can't find another place to stay. I'm now starting to feel like this is never ending. I'm doing that conversation in my head. I'm in a thinking trap that's telling me she's going to be here forever. I'm losing sleep. I'm now having wine every night because it's like I'm looking after people all the time. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm out of control. A lot of my old habits have gone out the window. And when my good habits like exercise and eating well and getting enough sleep, when they go out the window, then my stress levels are only going to head in the wrong direction. So likewise, when you're seeing yourself experiencing loss of sleep, drinking, smoking, eating more, and those things you can see on the card here, then it might be that stress is really starting to take over. Finally, we get to that point where stress is ruling our life. It's having a significant impact on our functioning in every day. We might be experiencing health problems. In one of our future series, we're going to talk about the chemical reactions that go on in our bodies when we're experiencing chronic stress and how they have a huge impact on our physical health as well. Why do people get sick more often when they're experiencing stress? I might be constantly sad or angry, and I might be constantly expecting the worst. So what I like about this little tool is that rather than having conversations with people about, are you really stressed or are you fine? Or asking somebody, are you stressed? People will either say, yes, I'm really stressed, or no, I'm fine. And often it can make people feel a bit defensive too. We kind of turn the tide on this and say, well, actually, rather than asking how stressed, if you're stressed, are you not stressed? We get people to start thinking about the symptoms. I know for me, if you ask me if I'm stressed or not stressed, I won't recognise that I'm stressed until it gets pretty bad. And what I've learned over my life is that if I can start noticing when I'm a bit distracted, frustrated, a bit last minute mindseted, then perhaps that's a sign that stress is creeping in and I want to get back up that stairway before I get too far down it. So when you see the physical card, you'll see you can then flip it over. You can identify where you think you are on the stairway of stress. And on this side is a conversation starter around what are the things you can do to get yourself back up that stairway. And I really say this is a conversation starter. These are tips and tools that we give people to have a conversation with. Firstly, if you identify as ruling, that's where we're really bogged. And so if you feel that stress is ruling your life, it's important to get help. Your GP is one of the best places that you can go, or you can use the many wonderful helplines like Beyond Blue. Some people in workplaces have an employee assistance program. But it's so important to say if it's ruling we need to understand that just as if we were suffering a fever for a long period of time, there's chemical reactions going on in our bodies that are making us mentally unwell, just like there would be if they were physical. And there's no shame in going to get help. In fact, it's important. But often in workplace conversations, we ask people to identify where they're at on that stairway, and they'll identify that they're either overstaying or settling in. And a lot of times people say to me, oh, look, I swing between those top 3 stairs. So take a moment, have a look, and think about what might stand out for you. So there's a couple of things when I do this with different teams, I'll often go back and ask them afterwards what they did. Stepping outside is a really popular one. A lot of people will say to me, particularly I know a lot of you work outside, but stepping outside if you don't is a really powerful one, to step into nature and maybe have your lunch out there or go for a 10-minute walk during your lunch break and things like that. Even if you do work outside, taking a moment to stop for 30 seconds and look out to sea or look at a tree. You know, in an 8-hour workday, there's about 1,000 blocks of 30 seconds. And if you just take that 30 seconds and think about your breathing, or even thinking about something that's good in your life, think about something you look forward to doing, someone you care for, 30 seconds of just calm focus on those things can really make a difference to your stress levels. And will it make them go away? Perhaps not. But like I say to so many people when we talk continuums, if I'm feeling here and I'd like to be there, but I can do something to get me this far, then that's got to be a positive thing. So I encourage you to get a copy of the Stairway of Stress, start some conversations around it. It can be quite fun in workplace settings because we can start to ask each other, where are you on the stairway of stress? Or if somebody's looking a little bit flustered, we can say, hey, is stress settling in for you? And remembering that when stress is visiting, we can have a positive impact on ourselves and a positive impact on others by talking about what's going on and using that positive energy to help people around us. So that's pretty much the wrap up for our Quick Bites number 1. I'd love to hear from people about whether or not you'd like to continue with these topics and in fact what topics you'd like to continue with. The other thing that's really important to note is that on our website you can see that we've got 4 different sessions booked for the Mental Health First Aid accredited training. Because of COVID in the eastern states, we're making these available to everybody nationally online. What's involved is one 5 to 7 hour session of e-learning content, which you can do at your own pace. You're given 2 to 3 weeks to get that done. And then we come together for 2.5 hour face-to-face workshops. They're a week apart. And during those workshops, you get to practice and learn the skills to become an accredited mental health first aid trainer. You don't have to have any background education to participate. It's open to everybody in our industry, whether you're a fisher, a processor, a retailer, or some other part of our commercial seafood community. And it's also open to friends and family of our communities. So please get across to stayafloat.com.au and register for this training. You're saving yourself around $300 and getting some skills, just like with physical first aid, that could really save lives. Please, particularly for those watching the video, drop me a line, joe@seafoodindustryaustralia.com.au if you've watched this video. Give me your thoughts, and I hope to see plenty of you when we get to our Quick Bites number 2. Thank you.